Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking one of the most unbelievable, just absolutely mind-blowing stories in all of human history. We're looking at the rise, the total absolute dominance, and the eventual vanishing of the Mongol Empire. It's this wild story of incredible military genius, ruthless pragmatism, and some really shocking historical ironies. Okay, let's dive into this. Number one, we are talking about the builders of the single largest contiguous land empire in the history of the world, period. It was way larger than Rome, larger than literally anything that had ever come before it. And what makes this so astonishing is that it didn't start in some established, wealthy civilization. Not at all. It started from absolute, desolate nothingness out on the harsh Eurasian steppe. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to ask, how exactly did a starving steppe outcast achieve all of this? Because this empire was essentially willed into existence by just one man, Temujin, who we all know today as Genghis Khan. And his background? It's highly, highly improbable. He came from this lesser noble lineage, his father was actually poisoned when he was young, and his family was completely abandoned by their tribe to just fend for themselves. He had to survive a brutally harsh childhood on the steppe by foraging for roots, fishing, and literally eating rats. He started with less than nothing. Section 1. Rise of the Universal Ruler. So, how in the world did he go from foraging for survival to unifying a massive continent? Well, Temujin obviously didn't have wealth, but he rebuilt his power through pure, raw, physical toughness and some seriously brilliant political skill. He slowly gathered followers and systematically outsmarted older, much more established tribal leaders. And this brilliantly illustrates his greatest innovation. See, for centuries, steppe politics were defined by this super rigid clan hierarchy, right? Your birthright totally dictated your position. Well, Temujin completely rejected that. He replaced it with a strict Mongol meritocracy. He promoted people based on their actual skill and merit, not who their parents happened to be. Plus, he redistributed loot fairly and intentionally mixed conquered enemy warriors into his own units so they couldn't just band together and rebel. It was a completely revolutionary way to organize an army. By the year 1206, after repeatedly defeating all these rival tribes and successfully resisting the neighboring Chinese states, who were constantly trying to use bribes and this whole divide and rule tactic against the nomads, Temujin achieved total unification. He called what's known as a Kurultai. Basically, that's a great assembly or council of the steppe tribes, and it was at this specific council that he was officially proclaimed Genghis Khan, which translates to the universal ruler. Section 2. The Mongol War Machine. Unifying the tribes was one massive thing, but actually taking over the world, that required a massive leap from political unity to sheer military genius. And a huge part of that genius comes down to a really simple number: 10. The Mongols used a highly organized decimal system for their military. Their troops were divided into incredibly strict units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. This gave them an absolutely unprecedented level of coordination, discipline, and mobility on the battlefield that other armies at the time simply couldn't even dream of matching. Their tactical advantages were just unreal. We're not just talking about guys riding horses here. These were warriors who had trained in horseback archery literally since childhood. Every single soldier maintained multiple horses so they could swap mounts on the go and cover astonishing distances incredibly fast without ever stopping to rest. They totally mastered complex battlefield maneuvers, like their famous feigned retreat. This is where they'd pretend to run away in absolute panic, draw the enemy out into this long, vulnerable line, and then just turn around and completely destroy them. Oh, and when they ran into heavily walled cities in China, they didn't just give up. They rapidly adapted by co-opting captured engineers to build siege weapons for them. Now, it's really important that we separate the actual facts from the cinematic legends here. There are all these myths out there, like the idea that the Mongols padded out their armies with thousands of straw-filled dummies to inflate their numbers and scare their enemies. But the reality of their success? It didn't need any Hollywood tricks. Their terrifying speed, combined with genuine, highly calculated psychological warfare, was totally real, and honestly, way more effective than any straw dummy ever could be. The speed of their early expansion is actually terrifying. Right after that Kurultai in 1206, they pivoted straight to China, capturing the Jin capital near modern Beijing by 1215. But 1219, that's a fascinating turning point. The Mongols actually sent a peaceful merchant caravan along with secret envoys over to the Khwarezmian Empire in the west. But local officials in Otrar completely mistreated them and executed them. Big mistake. Huge. Genghis Khan literally suspended his military operations in China, turned his entire war machine to the west, and just completely dismantled the Khwarezmian state. They devastated great cities like Bukhara and Samarkand in brutal retaliation. Section 3. Succession and stalled conquests. So, Genghis Khan died in 1227, and for all of their unbelievable military brilliance, the Mongols actually had a massive structural weakness. They had 0 automatic rules for succession. So every time a great Khan died, all that military momentum just completely stalled out. Genghis' chosen successor was his son, Ogedei. Now, Ogedei is kind of a complex figure. He had some very real, solid administrative achievements. I mean, he organized the first empire-wide census, built a rudimentary postal relay system, and constructed granaries to help prevent famine. But he also had a legendary reputation for his personal vices, specifically extreme heavy drinking, which seriously impacted how he ruled. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we view the survival of Western Europe. Back in 1241, Mongol forces under Batu and the brilliant general Subutai were just crushing European armies. But then, suddenly, they packed up and turned back. There's this super popular historical myth that says Europe was saved purely by Ogedei's drinking problem. Basically that he drank himself to death, which forced all the generals to rush home for a cruel tide to pick a new leader. And sure, his death definitely required a council, but the reality? It was extreme logistical limits. A lack of grazing land for all those horses and the immense challenge of operating that deep into completely unknown territory played a massive, massive role in halting their advance. Because eventually, even the greatest land empire in history is going to hit physical and geographical limits, right? Let's look at a few. In 1258, the Mongols brutally sacked Baghdad. It was absolutely catastrophic, though it's worth noting it didn't completely erase 500 years of Islamic knowledge everywhere, like some of the more dramatic accounts try to claim. Then in 1260 at Angelut, the Mamluks finally defeated a Mongol army in battle, which was the first real crack in this whole myth of absolute Mongol invincibility. And then you have 1274 and 1281, when Kublai Khan tried to invade Japan. But being a horse-born people, they really struggled with naval warfare. Both of their invasion fleets were destroyed by massive typhoons, which the Japanese famously called kamikaze, or divine winds. Section 4. Governing a global empire. Even with those geographical limits, we have to remember they still ruled an unimaginably vast amount of territory. And to do that, they had to transition from being violent conquerors to highly pragmatic administrators. They established what historians call the Pax Mongolica. They connected the sprawling empire with incredible infrastructure, relay stations, roads, and mounted couriers. And the absolute key to all of this was something called the paisa. Think of it like the ultimate VIP passport system. If a traveler had a paisa tablet, they could securely travel massive, massive distances and essentially just requisition horses and supplies from local stations anywhere across the empire. And their style of governing, it was surprisingly hands-off in some ways. A lot of the time, they just kept existing local officials right where they were, as long as they answered directly to the Mongols. They also allowed broad religious pluralism and freedom, which was pretty rare at the time. Again, the rule was simple. As long as you paid your taxes and acknowledged the Khan, you were good. They actively encouraged a booming Silk Road trade because they loved the wealth it brought in. And whenever they lacked a specific skill, like we mentioned with naval warfare, they didn't stress about it. They just requisitioned the best experts, like Chinese shipbuilders, to do the work for them. So, the crucial point is this deeply dark historical irony. The Pax Mongolica essentially built early globalization. It made the world incredibly connected and wealthy. But those exact same incredibly efficient trade networks and relay stations, they served as the literal superhighway for the deadliest pandemic in human history. The infrastructure of the Mongol Empire directly facilitated the rapid spread of the Black Death straight into Europe. Section 5. Fragmentation and enduring legacy. Like all great empires, it couldn't last forever. But the decline wasn't some dramatic overnight collapse. It was really a slow, painful process of internal division. Remember that structural weakness we talked about regarding succession? Well, it finally broke the empire right in half. After a great Khan died in 1259, a massive succession crisis erupted between two brothers, Kublai and Arik Böke. It got so bad they literally held competing Kurultais. This resulted in a massive civil war that fundamentally fractured the unity of the entire empire forever, splitting it into distinct regional zones. And this division leads us right into their final chapter, where they fractured into 4 main khanates. And here is the ultimate irony of the Mongols. The conquerors were eventually conquered by the very cultures they ruled over. In China, the Yuan dynasty completely adopted Chinese court practices. Over in Persia, the Ilkhanate converted to Islam and took on Persian styles of kingship. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia fractured between nomadic and settled factions, and the Golden Horde in Russia gradually assimilated and started losing ground to rising Russian powers. They didn't just rule these places, they blended right in. But listen, their political and cultural diffusion survived for centuries after the Central Empire actually fell apart. Later, massive states like Timor's immense Central Asian Empire were built directly on top of Mongol foundations. Even the powerful Indian Mughal Empire literally derives its very name from the word Mongol. Their blueprints for running an empire heavily shape the modern world as we know it. Which leaves us with one final, really fascinating question to ponder. Did the Mongols actually vanish? Aside from the cultural and political borders they drew that still exist on our maps today, a very famous genetic study suggests that a significant proportion of men worldwide carry lineages that are traceable directly back to Genghis Khan's family tree. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Did history's greatest conquerors actually disappear from the earth, or did they simply merge into our very DNA? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.